Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, here to help you fall asleep with these chilling horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is, so feel free to leave a comment. When you're ready, get comfortable and relax. It all started. I had booked a reservation for a guided tour of the abandoned Oakwood Penitentiary, a sprawling derelict complex tucked away in the remote woods of northern Pennsylvania. The facility, once a foreboding prison, now welcomed visitors with a choice between an organized tour and a self-guided exploration. Believe me when I say the grounds are enormous, almost labyrinthine in their layout. That overcast autumn morning, I loaded up my gear and climbed into my old station wagon. When I arrived at the penitentiary, a friendly yet slightly tense tour guide named Mr. Carter greeted me at the entrance. I explained that I was not only a horror novelist, but also a former prison guard. So naturally, I was interested in both the historic and the more modern sections of the compound. With calm, matter-of-fact precision, he pointed out the areas best suited to my interests, and I eagerly marked on my hand-drawn map the spots where I expected to find striking photo opportunities. For check-in, he had me sign my name on an old, yellowed paper form, a field that would later record my checkout as well. "Do you ever lose someone?" I joked as he took my signature. He gave a nervous laugh, a laugh that sounded more uneasy than warm. "Oh, you'd be surprised," he replied in a tone that sent a shiver down my spine even before I began my tour. Just as I was about to step away, he leaned in and whispered a warning. "Those buildings marked in black on your map, do not enter them. Avoid them completely, even if you happen to pass right by." "Why is that?" I asked. He hesitated, then almost whispered, "You really don't want to know. Let's just say there's a danger there beyond your imagination." With those ominous words echoing in my mind, I set off into the decaying heart of Oakwood Penitentiary. The first building I entered was almost surreal. Instead of the expected grim, institutional look, it resembled a stately stone manor, its architecture evoking the faded grandeur of an old colonial estate. Inside the spacious foyer, I pulled out my camera and cell phone. I snapped a few quick pictures with the phone while carefully adjusting my camera settings to capture the perfect, ghostly atmosphere. The sky outside was a brilliant, cloudless blue, lending the structure an inviting air. Yet, as soon as I stepped into the shadow of the entrance, the interior transformed into something akin to an opulent ballroom. Behind the foyer stretched a vast room with an ancient brick floor, and along one wall, stone arches led to a dead-end corridor, as if a once grand passage had been deliberately sealed off. I turned toward the first of many somber hallways that loomed ahead. That was exactly the path I intended to follow. Leaving the grand room behind, I strolled along the corridor, my camera clicking away as bright sunlight streamed through broken, dust-coated windows, illuminating the decay that had set in over the years. Modern metal doors with glass inserts lined the corridor, though the glass in almost every door was shattered, as if repeatedly vandalized or scarred by inexplicable events. Whether this destruction was deliberate or caused by something else remained a mystery. Before long, I reached a room whose massive metal door was flanked by wrought iron bars, a clear sign that this building had once served as a prison. Inside, all I found were peeling layers of paint on barren walls. There was no trace of the beds or bunks that might have once indicated long-term confinement. At the far end of the hall, a spiral staircase split in two directions. One set of steps led upward, and the other descended into the basement. Curiosity got the better of me, and I chose the stairs upward, hoping for a commanding view of the entire compound. My hands trembled as I gripped the creaking railing, unsure whether it might give way with the slightest touch. To my relief and slight dismay, a small cloud of dust broke loose from the wall, a testament to how long that dust had settled there. At the top, I was greeted with a panoramic vista of the penitentiary's sprawling grounds. Yet, even as I took in the wide view, I could see the unmistakable signs of decay that had plagued this section for years. In one room, a ceiling fan hung limply, its blades drooping as if they had melted from decades of neglect. I couldn't help but smile wryly at the sheer desolation. The echo of my own footsteps sounded almost alien in the vast emptiness. At the end of the corridor, I found another staircase, this one leading downward, secured by a rusted metal grid door. Mr. Carter had warned me earlier with strict instructions. Never open closed doors, and above all, never close open ones. When I later inquired about the reason, he explained in a measured, concerned tone, "We don't always have a key for every door. Once you close one, it can take hours to reopen it." Keeping that caution in mind, I descended the creaking stairs into the dark, musty basement. The smell of decay and long-lost splendor hit me immediately. Although the cool basement air was a welcome contrast to the stifling heat outside. A day when temperatures had crept into the high 90s Fahrenheit, it carried an undercurrent of foreboding. Down here, the decay was even more evident. Sections of the ceiling had collapsed, and peeling paint clung desperately to the walls. Only a few small windows allowed in meager light, and as I rounded a corner, I was swallowed by near total darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and in a burst of panic, I fumbled for my flashlight. The weak circle of light it produced was quickly suffocated by the overwhelming blackness, as if the darkness itself were determined to smother any trace of illumination. With cautious, measured steps, I pressed on, until my light caught a disturbing sight. Scrawled in vivid red letters on one wall was the word, "Help." Whether this plea dated back to the penitentiary's early days, or was the work of some malevolent vandal, and whether it was a cry for help or a macabre signature, I could not tell. Shaking my head, I stamped out the baffling message and continued onward. A sudden, cold draft diverted my attention. I found myself in a long, windowless corridor lined with a series of old pipes along the wall. According to my hand-drawn map, there was a tunnel somewhere in this building, though the map offered no clue as to its destination. Feeling I had explored everything this section had to offer, I ventured into the gloomy tunnel. The tunnel's damp, peeling ceiling and the oppressive narrowness forced me to stoop as I moved, careful not to hit my head on the falling plaster. With each step, the passage seemed to grow even tighter, sending my pulse racing. Up to that point, I had encountered only 3 other people on my tour. 2 wandering along a different path, and one who had left through the entrance as I stepped inside. The oppressive silence and the eerie echo of my footsteps made my nerves quiver. Several times, I turned back and shined my flashlight in the direction I'd come, but all I found was darkness. Despite my rising fear, an insatiable curiosity pushed me further. 15 agonizing minutes passed, and in the suffocating dark, guided only by the timid beam of my flashlight, each second felt like an eternity. At intervals, the tunnel branched off into side rooms and alternate corridors, yet I stubbornly followed the main path. Finally, I spotted a narrow sliver of light at the tunnel's end, a promise of escape. My heart pounded at the thought of finally tasting fresh air again, but just then, a sound behind me made my blood run cold. A dull clattering, like the sound of a stone falling. I quickly swung my flashlight back toward the tunnel, but there was nothing there, not even the supposed stone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I quickened my pace toward the light, propelled by sheer, raw nervousness. As soon as I emerged from the tunnel, I found myself in an old laundry room. Abandoned industrial washers and dryers, with shattered front panels, littered the space which was bathed in a harsh, unforgiving light. An opening ahead led directly out into the searing heat of the afternoon. I stepped out into the blinding sunlight and inhaled deeply, grateful for the fresh air, even though my body soon became slick with sweat, forcing me to pause and gulp down water from my bottle. Surveying my unfamiliar surroundings, I realized that I was in the middle of the compound, and my map showed that I had traversed nearly the entire complex, from its southern edge to almost its northern perimeter. Amazed, I shook my head and decided which building to explore next. To my left loomed the former prison mess hall, a location I had hoped would furnish me with the perfect photographs for my next horror novel. With a surge of anticipation, I stepped inside, only to find that, rather than rows of long-forgotten tables, the space was a series of empty, deserted rooms. I moved on to the adjoining kitchen, where the lingering smell of fried grease, like a ghost of meals past, filled the air. Down a nearby corridor, I caught faint voices. I was convinced they were the sounds of other visitors. Eventually, I reached what was known as the RHU section, a secluded area of the facility I was determined to document, particularly to capture the cells and the cramped recreational area. The RHU rec room was almost claustrophobic. Down below, a sturdy chain-link fence enclosed the space, while overhead, a sheet of plexiglass prevented anyone from climbing up, though that precaution was largely moot, as the entire area was encircled by sharp, barbed wire. The entire enclosure measured scarcely over 5 feet wide and about 13 to 16 feet long. In that moment, I imagined how it might feel if this tiny patch of freedom were the only available space in a prison, when suddenly the sound of a door slamming shattered the silence. I stopped and listened, but when no other visitors appeared, I hesitantly left the RHU rec room and stepped into its main area, where every cell door was wide open except for one solitary door. I tried to recall whether that door had been closed when I entered, but my memory was murky. At the same time, dark stories began to surface in my mind, tales I had once read on the now-defunct website of Oakwood Penitentiary. Stories of 2 notorious serial killers who had been housed here and met their end behind these very walls. I wasn't eager to consider whether one of them had perished in the RHU section. I quickly snapped a few photos of the cells before hastily leaving the area. The next building I entered resembled an endless corridor lined with cells for less dangerous inmates. Cells that lacked the bars or metal reinforcements one might expect on doors and windows. As I walked along this dim hall, my eye was caught by a gray box lying in the middle of the floor, from which a faint red light pulsed. Curious, I moved closer. But when I reached an adjacent room and encountered a man and a woman surrounded by modern surveillance equipment, cameras, monitors, microphones, I was taken aback. For a moment, I thought I had intruded on a live television production. Apologizing quickly, I backed out of the building, not wanting to become entangled in this mysterious situation. Across the way was the old chapel. I entered it to capture a few more photographs before planning to descend into the basement, only to discover yet another hidden tunnel. Not wanting to get lost a second time, I retraced my steps and returned to the main building to consult with the tour guides. Mr. Carter and his crew laughed good-naturedly about my brief disorientation, though they were equally intrigued by my encounter with the man and woman along with their high-tech equipment. They assured me that no film crews or camera setups had been scheduled that day, and none of them recalled seeing such individuals. Apparently, that one building had long attracted a cadre of paranormal researchers. I inquired about the other buildings I hadn't yet visited. The guides pointed me towards structures that now accommodated modern exhibits, one housing medical equipment, and another that had once been the morgue. All of these lay along the same path, so I thanked them and resumed my exploration. My first stop on this renewed circuit was one of the newer cell blocks, known simply as Block D. This modern section had been constructed about 30 years ago, at a time when the state government was pioneering cutting-edge prison technology, and later became a model for numerous correctional facilities across the country. Stepping into Block D, I felt an odd sense of relief. The clean, stark design reminded me of my days as a prison guard, though now on a scale far greater than I'd ever known. Block D was arranged in the shape of a vast triangle, with a central common area surrounded by long, unadorned rows of cells. I took countless photographs of the entire area, from the open corridors to the solitary cells and the minimalist furnishings. It was particularly striking that all the tables in the common areas had been removed, and even the most basic amenities like toilets and sinks were absent in each cell, a bizarre state of affairs that hinted at some forgotten experiment in corrections management. While I was absorbed in my photography, 2 fellow explorers entered Block D. I greeted them, and we exchanged experiences. One of them mentioned that he still worked in an active prison. It was fascinating to speak with someone who truly understood the inner workings of such an institution. After they disappeared as quickly as they had come, I ventured into the opposite wing. A section nearly identical in layout, yet possessing an eerily different atmosphere. Entering that wing felt like stepping into another dimension. The air was heavier, almost tangible, as if weighed down by some unseen force. Despite the skylights overhead, the darkness clinging to the corners seemed to sap all the energy from the room. I fished out my flashlight to peer into the murky recesses, but the longer I lingered, the more unsettled I became, as if the very room was unwilling to divulge its secrets. I discovered one cell that appeared slightly cleaner than the rest, and stepped inside to take photographs from a different perspective. Peering out through the small, grimy window, I noticed that the sky had grown noticeably darker, as if the day had abruptly given way to a gloomy evening. Suddenly, I heard a faint creak. When I spun around, I could scarcely believe my eyes. The door of the cell I was in was slowly closing by itself. For a moment, it all seemed like a dream. I was alone, or so I thought. In a surge of panicked uncertainty, I remembered Mr. Carter's stern warning never to reopen closed doors. Acting on instinct, I rushed to the door and forcefully kicked it until it burst open with a resounding crash, slamming back against the wall. I sprinted back into the common area and looked frantically over my shoulder, but no one was there. I dashed from cell to cell, peering into each one, desperate to spot the culprit behind this unsettling trick. But every cell was empty. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Panic set in, and though I noted the absence of even the most basic sanitary facilities, nothing was more urgent than the desperate need to escape the building. I bolted for the main entrance, but the massive wooden door seemed to have been sealed shut by unseen forces. I pulled at it with every ounce of strength, yet it refused to budge. In a frantic search for a tool to pry it open, I found nothing of use. My only hope lay in the memory of a side door I had noticed upon first entering. So I raced back into Block D, as if something invisible were chasing me, and crashed my shoulder against the door. With a grating squeal, it gave way and swung open. But instead of the sweet promise of freedom, I was met with 5 heavy stone steps leading down to a narrow path. I tumbled over each step until I finally landed headfirst in knee-deep, damp grass beneath an ancient oak tree. Out in the harsh afternoon sunlight, I felt a momentary wave of relief, though soon sweat slicked my forehead, and I paused to gulp water from my bottle. I scanned the area. Nothing looked familiar, and my map confirmed that I had nearly circumnavigated the entire compound, from the southern edge all the way to almost the northern boundary. Astonished, I shook my head and pondered which building I should explore next. While wandering across the deserted parking lot, I noticed a man lazily staring out from the window of a nearby building. In a compound this vast, such a sight wasn't unusual, but when I waved to him, he remained silent, his gaze unnervingly blank. That silent, almost spectral look made me shudder, and I resolved to continue on toward the last building on my list, the old morgue, which had captivated me since my arrival. The morgue was the very embodiment of horror. On the first floor, I found examination tables and antiquated patient chairs that, under the eerie lighting, seemed almost otherworldly. I took several detailed photographs, hoping they would lend an air of authenticity to my next book. Then I climbed the creaking stairs down to the basement, where I followed a long corridor that was said to lead directly to the morgue. Instead of an empty, abandoned space, I found myself confronted by a small crowd. Over a dozen people tightly huddled together, all craning their necks to see what was unfolding. I pushed my way forward to get a better look, but the crowd formed an impenetrable barrier. In a side room, I spied an old, rickety chair and climbed onto it, desperate for a better vantage point. What I saw nearly took my breath away. Standing before me was a man in a grimy white lab coat, the fabric stained with reddish splotches as if each stain told a tale of violence. On an examination table lay a woman identifiable by her faded green top and white shorts. Her exposed upper body rendered the scene shockingly inappropriate. Her chest had been crudely opened, and the man in the white coat held a human heart in his hand. No sooner had I gasped, "Oh my God," than the entire crowd fell into a stunned silence, and the man in the lab coat abruptly turned to face me. His look was not that of a normal human being. It was a silent reproach, as if I had intruded upon a sacred, forbidden moment. In a burst of panic, I wanted nothing more than to leap from my perch on the chair, yet my body felt paralyzed. My mind struggled to comprehend the bizarre scene while my body screamed, "Get out of here!" When the crowd suddenly shifted their attention toward me, an overwhelming instinct for survival propelled me into action. I bolted down the corridor without a backward glance, racing up the stairs 2 at a time until I finally crashed through a door as if it were my final escape. Once I was back in the blistering fresh air, I felt the initial panic begin to ebb, though the shock remained indelible. I ran on, driven by the primal need to flee that cursed place. Along the way, I encountered the silent man from the window once again. Now he stood directly in my path, motionless, his stare sending chills straight to my core. He blocked my way wordlessly. I sidestepped, sprinted onto an alternate route, and clutched my backpack tightly so as not to lose it. Yet, time and again, it seemed as though that spectral figure materialized from nowhere, purposefully crossing my path, as if determined to keep me ensnared in this nightmare. At last, when the tension reached its peak, I charged straight at him. He didn't budge an inch, and as I collided with him with all my might, it felt as though he dissolved into thin air. I felt nothing but a cold gust before finding myself on the other side. I stumbled, regained my footing, and ran until in the distance the main building came into view. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed several people from the morgue trying to beat me to the main building along alternative paths. But my survival instinct spurred me on. I ran as fast as I could until I finally burst through a door and plunged into the interior of the building. In that moment, I wasn't sure whether to blame the tour guides for their seemingly deadly game or order them to flee immediately. Inside the reception area, an eerie emptiness prevailed. The room wasn't just deserted, It had an almost ghostly, frozen-in-time quality. I picked up the yellowed map that had been handed to me that morning. It crumbled between my fingers as if it were an antique far beyond its time. Barely had I absorbed this moment of disorientation when I heard the sound of a door clattering behind me. Without a moment's hesitation, I dashed out into the abandoned parking lot. My car was there, strangely untouched, exactly where I had left it. Once, more than a dozen vehicles had been parked in this lot. Now it seemed as though only mine remained, abandoned by all but ghosts. My heart pounding, I leaped into the car and sped away at a breakneck pace. It wasn't until I was miles away, forced to slow by heavy traffic, that I began the journey home. But what happened afterward would haunt me forever. Since that day I first set foot in Oakwood Penitentiary, my life has been fundamentally altered. My home, though outwardly unchanged, now feels different. As if unseen eyes watch me constantly. As if I'll never find a moment's peace. Days pass while I struggle to comprehend what I experienced. The official website for the penitentiary has mysteriously vanished, as though it had never existed at all. Time and again, I have summoned the courage to drive past the old, abandoned road in the hope of catching a glimpse of that ominous compound. I reached out online, posting in forums and on social media, asking if anyone had any knowledge of the former Oakwood Penitentiary or its strange phenomena. But no one replied. I uploaded some of my photographs, pleading for any hint that someone else had ever been there. Not one click, not a single comment followed. I don't know if anyone will ever read this warning, but I must share it, to caution others, or at least to suggest that one exercise extreme care when visiting this place, if it still even exists. Only this morning did I finally receive an anonymous message, a cryptic note composed of just a few words. Go back the way you came. It took me a long while to grasp what my mysterious benefactor was trying to say. Even longer still before I summoned the courage to confront the truth. I didn't belong in this world. With a mixture of terror and resolve, I gathered my belongings and reluctantly returned to Oakwood Penitentiary. When I arrived, everything was just as desolate as I remembered. I retrieved my map once more, studied it carefully, and marked the quickest route back to Block D. As quietly as I could, I slipped into the main building, exited discreetly through a side door, and crept through the vast abandoned compound, ever cautious not to attract attention. I remained hidden in the shadows, the fading daylight rendering me nearly invisible. But halfway toward Block D, the silent man reappeared before me. I tried to bypass him, yet suddenly he seized my backpack and pulled me violently back. Before I knew what was happening, I found myself in a dim corridor of the RHU section, and I was thrown into a solitary cell. The man stood motionless for a long time, watching me silently as I curled up on the worn, old bed, fighting to stay awake. Then, out of nowhere, a loud knock echoed from an adjacent cell. "Hello?" I called uncertainly. "Hello?" came several indistinct voices in reply. "Are you trapped here too?" I asked hesitantly. "It depends," a voice replied with a hint of irony. "Are you human or something else?" I chuckled nervously. "I'm human. Apparently, I got caught in this world when I was pulled from Block D into this alternate reality." "Wait a minute. Weren't you the former guard I spoke with earlier?" asked one voice. "Yes, my name is Mark," I said. "Were you pulled in just before me?" "It appears so," answered another voice. "And what about your companion?" "We were separated. I haven't seen her since." "Tell me again, what was she wearing?" She hesitated before replying. "She wore a pastel green top and white shorts. Why?" I lowered my gaze and murmured, "I'm sorry, but I know where she is, in the morgue." They were performing an autopsy on her. A heavy silence fell, punctuated only by the occasional quiet sob. "What's your name, anyway?" I finally asked. "I'm Mark, and you?" "I'm Mark, too," the other voice answered, revealing itself as female. "I'm Claudia. Nice to meet you, Mark." "Likewise. I wish it weren't here," I murmured. "At least they only found you after you'd been missing for a while," she said softly. I had long been gone from the compound until I returned, driven by a curiosity I just couldn't shake. "Then why did you come back?" I told her about the missing website, the cryptic message, and that eerie feeling of no longer belonging to our world. "I believe we're trapped in another dimension, and the only way back is through Block D," she said thoughtfully. "That's hard to believe," I whispered, "but I have a plan." "Have they ever brought you meals?" "Yes, 3 times a day, just like in any normal prison." "Maybe they're not just guards, but beings bound to this place, just like us. But that can't last forever." "They should be coming soon, let's hope your plan works," she said, and we vowed to be ready for escape if the opportunity arose. A little over an hour later, the food hatch in our cell swung open, and a meager sandwich was slid through. The man who had kept us captive passed by silently without a word. 5 minutes later, I rummaged through my backpack and pulled out a thin metal wedge, one end wrapped in old, sticky tape. With trembling hands, I pressed the wedge against the lock of our cell door, grabbed a small hammer, and pounded at the lock until, with a resounding bang, the door burst open. Cautiously, I crept over to Claudia's cell and handed her the wedge and hammer. Moments later, she too was free, and we exchanged whispered instructions as we slipped out of the RHU section and melted back into the shadows of Block D. Approaching the front door, I felt a deep, unsettling disquiet. I opened it slowly, paused, and said, "I don't think this is the right way." "What other way is there?" Claudia retorted. "The note said, 'Go back the way you came.'" "So, we have to retrace our steps?" "No, I came out through the side door. I think we need to take that alternative route." I turned toward the side door, but Claudia stepped in front of me. "That's not the right way," she insisted. "All right," I conceded slowly. "Then we'll try it your way." We proceeded together down a long corridor. Suddenly, Claudia halted and spread her arms as if attempting to open an invisible passage. "It doesn't seem to work," she muttered, and I watched her with growing skepticism. "I have another theory. Come with me," I declared. We returned to the left wing of the cells. "I was in this very cell when something unusual happened," I began, running my hand along the rough wall that led to the door. Without warning, I leapt from the cell, slammed the door shut behind me, and left Claudia inside. "What are you doing?" she cried, alarmed. "It's a surprise. Wait here, I'll be right back," I explained as I sprinted toward the side door I'd used earlier. I tugged hard at the door, and it swung open effortlessly. No sooner had I stepped through than I was again overcome by that oppressive, anticipatory weight in the air. Without hesitation, I ran across Block D toward another exit door. But just before I reached it, Claudia suddenly stepped directly in front of me. I stopped abruptly, and she looked at me with eyes filled with piercing disappointment. "How did you get here?" I demanded, suspicious. Her eyes flashed with betrayal as she murmured, "Not at all, thanks to your clumsiness." I walked past her and tugged at the door, but it was locked. "How did you get in?" I repeated, incredulous. "The door must have locked behind me after I passed through," she said quietly. "Help me open it," I pleaded as I fiddled with the lock once more. She joined me at the door, and together we pulled at the heavy barrier. After a minute, we both paused, exhausted. "Is there another exit?" I panted. I don't know, she replied softly. What about the side door? It was open. Maybe it's locked now. Claudia dashed off in the opposite direction while I withdrew the hammer and wedge from my backpack. I positioned the wedge against the bolt and began pounding it in again. My first attempt failed, and with every strike my desperation grew. I knew I had to get through before it was too late. What are you doing? Claudia whispered in my ear. Slowly, I turned. There she stood, right beside me. I'm trying the same trick that freed us from the RHU, I explained. I don't think it will work this time, she said with a crooked smile. Why not? This door is different. I have a feeling you're not who you say you are. What do you mean? I asked, feeling my throat tighten. I mean, you've been it all along. You deliberately closed the door after I stepped into the right wing. You meant to trap me in this cell. And you already had a victim in mind. That poor woman you dragged to the morgue. I was nothing more than an accident in your carefully laid net. You never expected me to escape. An eerie, unnaturally wide grin spread across her face as her eyes transformed into empty, black voids. A sight that seemed to mirror the very abyss. You're right, she said, her voice echoing like the chorus of countless tormented souls. I never expected you to escape. But instead of panicking, you took the next step, and that, Mark, is the worst of all. But now I'm back, and you still need me here, I retorted firmly. Suddenly, she laughed mockingly and snatched the hammer from my hand. You're not going anywhere. You're coming back to the morgue with us, she declared ominously as she leaned over me. But you didn't count on this, I said. And in that split second, I lunged toward a side door that burst open with a deafening crash. I stormed through it, and the wind rushing in snapped the door shut behind me. Outside, a piercing scream tore through the air, a sound so shrill it nearly rendered me deaf. I stood on the other side, watching as, in Claudia's eyes, a flash of raw anger and triumph ignited. With a clenched fist, she tried to pull me back, but the invisible barrier that separated me from the exit only grew stronger with every struggle. It only works if I go willingly, I whispered, pressing on. You can't hold me against my will. Claudia growled, her teeth unnaturally elongated, her face twisting into a grotesque, inhuman snarl. Fine, then I'm leaving now, I said softly, examining my aching arm. In that split second, she released her grip. I felt her hand clutch my wrist so fiercely that a searing pain shot through me, as if my bones were about to shatter under the pressure. I screamed, but when I looked down at my bloodied, limp hand, a dark, mocking smile played across her features. With one final, defiant glance back at the door, I wiped my hand resolutely and turned away. Claudia laughed softly, then stepped back as I emerged into the glaring sunlight. Only a few steps away, overwhelmed by pain, I collapsed. I fumbled for my first aid kit in my backpack and hurriedly fashioned an improvised splint for my injured wrist. Each painful step carried me back to the main building. Every shifting shadow and distant cry of an owl sent fresh jolts of fear through me. Finally, when I encountered Mr. Carter again, his eyes widened in horror. You're back, he stuttered. I took a little detour, I murmured, trying to keep my composure despite the persistent pain and the surreal, nightmarish events. Unlike my first visit, the compound now appeared eerily deserted. All other visitors had vanished. What happened to all your other guests? I asked as I took a final sip from my water bottle. We now conduct tours only on weekends, he explained in a measured tone. What day is it today? I asked in disbelief. Wednesday, he replied. Wednesday, I repeated slowly. trying to wrap my mind around the surreal fact that it seemed as though or rather, we, were trapped in a different time, as if 5 days had passed since I first stepped through these doors. Mr. Carter examined my throbbing wrist, and I managed a weary smile. "A souvenir, huh?" he muttered dryly. After I finished my water and slowly mustered the strength to stand, I said simply, "I want to go home now." "Of course," he replied, handing me another form. He absent-mindedly flipped through the clipboard. Names and signatures scrawled on its pages, and I noticed that on the back of some pages, fields remained blank, as if waiting for those who never returned. "How many have you already lost?" I whispered. "That I cannot say," he murmured, eventually finding my form and handing it to me. I signed my name in the designated field and noticed above it a woman's name with an empty space beside it, as if she had yet to be recorded. I could only assume that it belonged to the one known as Claudia, the very woman who had, in one way or another, been taken. With one final glance over the desolate compound, I turned toward the exit. "You're the only one who came back," I heard a deep, ominous voice intone. I turned to Mr. Carter, but he pretended as if nothing had been said. Outside, beneath the dazzling afternoon sun, I searched for my car. It stood exactly where I'd left it. 5 more vehicles were scattered across the parking lot, and I couldn't help but wonder which one belonged to the woman who would never return. I share this story as a warning. Sometimes places are abandoned for very good reason, and some secrets are best left undiscovered. I, along with my friends Jake, Emily, and Dylan, have always been passionate urban explorers. You probably know the kind of adventures we embark on, roaming abandoned places, recording them with our smartphones, and later uploading the footage to YouTube. Whether it's deserted factories, long-shuttered amusement parks, or forsaken industrial sites, if you can imagine it, we've likely been there. Of course, our hobby is thrilling, but it comes with serious risks. Some of the places we visit are so dilapidated that even a strong gust of wind might bring the structure down. You have to be extremely cautious and always keep an eye on your surroundings. Who knows when a rotten staircase might suddenly give way or a rusted walkway collapse, sending you plummeting 50 feet onto hard concrete. Plus, there's always the danger of running into stray drug users or opportunistic vagrants. And since what we do is considered trespassing in the United States, it's anything but legal. We've had our fair share of close calls. Once, a security guard chased us out of an abandoned factory, and another time the police were called. But thankfully, the officer was lenient and only gave us a warning. A couple of weeks ago, Dylan received a tip about a new location that seemed perfect for our next video, especially with Halloween just around the corner. The tip pointed us to an old, decrepit state asylum located in a neighboring county in upstate New York. The imposing building, constructed in the late 1800s, had been abandoned since the early 1990s. Dark rumors swirled around the facility. It was said that an investigative journalist had once gone undercover as a patient and uncovered severe abuse and neglect by the staff. Some even whispered that inhumane experiments were secretly carried out there. Of course, these were just urban legends. Officially, the asylum was shut down due to state budget cuts. Dylan mentioned that the building was scheduled for demolition soon, to make way for a modern housing complex. That, we figured, was likely our only chance to explore the place one more time. Last Saturday, the 4 of us piled into Jake's old Ford and set off on the roughly 2-hour drive. The abandoned asylum lay in a rural area on the outskirts of a small town. Even from a distance, as the building came into view, we knew we wouldn't be disappointed. Before us loomed a gloomy, gray brick building with 4 stories. its narrow barred windows resembling cold, staring eyes. The property was set on a vast, overgrown lawn, enclosed by a high, rusted chain-link fence draped with coiled barbed wire. At the main entrance hung a faded sign that read, "No trespassing," its surface pockmarked with bullet holes and secured by a heavy chain and an old padlock. After a few minutes of searching, Emily spotted a spot in the fence where a previous explorer, likely armed with bolt cutters, had cut a sufficiently large hole in the wire. We easily slipped through and followed the overgrown driveway up to the main building. As we drew closer, an eerie feeling began to settle over me. The imposing structure seemed to loom above us, as if it were mocking our intrusion with its countless little, barred windows, like sinister eyes watching our every move. The entrance doors, which had once been nailed shut, now hung wide open after someone had removed the wooden barricade. They resembled the gaping maw of a predator, waiting to swallow its prey. We stopped about 20 feet from the entrance so that Dylan could film a brief introduction, with Jake standing in front of the asylum. Then, armed with our smartphones, we made our way inside the decaying building. Inside the lobby, what must once have served as a reception area, debris was scattered everywhere. Trash, leaves blown in through the open doors, empty soda cans, fast food wrappers, cigarette butts, and more littered the floor. These were likely remnants left behind by local teens using the building as a hangout, or by homeless individuals seeking refuge to drink and sleep. The walls were covered in graffiti, and on the old reception desk sat a stainless steel bedpan that none of us dared to inspect any further. After a while, we discovered the main staircase, which stood next to the long silent elevators. We ascended to the second floor, once home to the administrative offices. Honestly, there wasn't much of interest there. When the asylum closed, nearly everything had been cleared out. Only a few empty filing cabinets and dusty, outdated office equipment remained. In the director's office, I noticed an open cardboard box on the otherwise bare desk. Out of curiosity, I peered inside and found a series of old audio cassettes, still in their cases. Dozens of them, with handwritten names and dates on the labels. I wasn't sure what they were for, but Dylan speculated that they might be recordings of therapy sessions with former patients. Out of sheer curiosity, I took one of the cassettes as a souvenir, tucking it into my pocket. We continued our exploration, filming anything that seemed remotely interesting. In the end, the visit proved rather underwhelming. The upper floors, where the patient rooms had once been, were nearly empty, aside from a few rusted bed frames, more debris, and the occasional tag from a graffiti artist. The interior didn't exude any particularly menacing atmosphere. There were no blood-stained operating tables, rusted surgical instruments, or an eerie, abandoned wheelchair left in a dark corridor. Since the facility had been minimally secured during its operation, there were no dangerous or violent patients lurking about. This was not some grim dungeon straight out of a horror film featuring characters like Hannibal Lecter. In terms of ambiance, it could easily have been an empty office complex. After about an hour, we decided to wrap up our excursion. Jake filmed the closing segment in which he apologized to our viewers for the underwhelming video, and we left the building. We got back into the car and drove home without any further incidents. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my usual routine and almost forgot about our asylum exploration, until one Wednesday morning when I was getting ready for work and realized I couldn't find my car keys. I frantically searched my apartment, and in the pocket of my jacket I discovered not my keys, but the cassette tape I had taken from the asylum. A tape I'd completely forgotten about. Pressed for time, I set the cassette on my desk and continued my search. Eventually, I found my keys tangled up under the cushions on my couch, making me only a few minutes late for work. That evening, when I returned home, the cassette caught my eye again on my desk. After dinner, I decided to give it a closer listen. It was a 90-minute tape designed to fit into a standard portable cassette recorder. The faded handwritten label read, Bennett, Michael, August 17, 1991. Intrigued, I rummaged through the garage until I found my father's old cassette recorder. I inserted fresh batteries, loaded the tape, and hoped that, after all these years, both the device and the tape would still work. With my headphones on, I pressed play. For a few seconds, all I heard was a faint hissing sound. Then, a dry, clinical male voice spoke in a monotonous tone. Patient 67531, Bennett, MS Session Number 7. Session conducted by Dr. Edward Winters at 2 p.m. on August 17th, 1991. After a few seconds of hissing silence, the recording resumed. First came the heavy, irregular breathing of a man, before the professional, clinical voice of the doctor spoke again. "How are you feeling today, Michael?" There was more heavy, uneven breathing, but no answer. "Michael," the doctor repeated, and then a second voice, that of a younger man, responded in an agitated, tense tone, as if struggling to keep his composure. "What does it matter to you? What's it going to change? You keep asking me the same damn questions over and over." The tone swung between raw anger and desperate frustration. "This is a crucial part of your therapy, Michael. We need to get to the root of your mental anguish so you can lead a normal life and reintegrate into society," the doctor replied in a calm, almost indifferent tone. "Fuck," the young man erupted. "You're just playing mind games with me like all the other doctors. To you, I'm nothing more than a nutcase, a subject for your little experiments to get noticed in the big medical journals." The doctor continued softly, "I'm truly trying to help you, Michael." A disdainful huff followed from the young man. "There's nothing you can do for me, Doc. No one can help me." In his voice, anger mixed with pure fear. "Please, Michael, you have to work with me if you want to get through this. You haven't told the other doctors about what you're so terrified of, what keeps you awake at night in a cold sweat. Why don't you tell me, Michael? Tell me what you've been so scared of all these years." After a long, oppressive silence, the young man continued resignedly. "All right, I'll tell you. Just so I can finally say it out loud and get it off my chest. You'll think I'm crazy, because everyone does. That's why I'm here. Why not?" He let out a humorless laugh, paused to collect himself, and then went on. "Do you know what it's like to live every single moment in sheer terror? To know the worst thing imaginable, the absolute worst that anyone could ever know? Do you know what it's like to live in constant fear? What are you afraid of, Michael?" the doctor asked softly. "What if you could see things that others can't? Things that aren't meant for human eyes?" "I see them, Doctor. It started when I was 8 or 9, when I first saw them." "Who do you see?" inquired the doctor. "The forgotten. That's what I call them. Some refer to them as the ancients or the primordials." "What exactly are these forgotten, Michael?" "You hear all sorts of ghost stories about apparitions. Some claim to communicate with them as if they're mediums or spiritualists. Most of them are frauds. But maybe some are real. However, psychics usually deal with human ghosts." He sighed, his voice trembling. "If they were human ghosts, maybe I could learn to accept them. But the forgotten are not human. They never were." "Tell me more, Michael. I'm listening," urged the doctor. "They're old, very, very old. They died long before humanity existed. But before they perished, they lived here across millions of years. Our planet is billions of years old, and humanity has only been around for a few million years." Do you really believe that our civilization was the first on this earth? That there was no one before us? They were the original rulers of this planet. They died hundreds of millions of years ago, long before even the dinosaurs roamed. Yet their spirits remain here, forever invisible, always watching us. There is no afterlife, no heaven, no hell. When we die, our spirit simply lingers here, eternally. The forgotten have witnessed the rise of humanity, seen our civilization flourish, and they despise us. They view us as intruders, as invaders, as thieves who stole the land that once belonged to them. "I understand," said the doctor, though his tone was patronizing. "Yeah, sure, you understand," Michael muttered bitterly. "What do the forgotten look like, Michael?" the doctor asked. "You wouldn't want to know. They're monstrous, indescribable, and filled with rage, envy, and vengeance. I know this because they communicate with me." "Do they really speak to you?" "Oh yes, all the time. You know I can see them. When I'm awake, I can't decipher their words. They speak in a language I don't understand. But when I sleep, they come to me in my dreams, and then I do understand. The forgotten hate us, but they can't hurt us. They can't touch us because they're ghosts and we're alive. As long as we live, we're safe. But when we die, when our spirits leave our mortal bodies and cross over into their realm, that's when the reckoning begins." After a long pause, Michael whispered, "Whoever conceived of the idea of hell, of demons and tortured souls in eternal damnation, may have only caught a fleeting glimpse of what the forgotten do with the spirits of the dead." Then, abruptly, the recording ended. The tape cut off suddenly, and the hissing static resumed. I listened for several more minutes, but nothing else followed. Finally, I turned off the recorder, removed the cassette, and stared at it in disbelief, deeply disturbed by what I had just heard. Out of sheer curiosity, I later searched online for Michael S. Bennett, along with the name of the asylum. I found an obituary in a local newspaper reporting that Michael Samuel Bennett had died on November 11, 1994, at the age of 31, with no mention of the cause of death. Further research led me to an article stating that he had died alone in his apartment from liver failure, after years of battling alcoholism. The accompanying photo showed a gaunt man with dark, tormented eyes. I found no evidence that he had ever suffered from psychological issues or had been treated at the asylum. Perhaps his family omitted that detail, or maybe the hospital records were strictly confidential. Perhaps it was even a different man altogether. But the words Michael spoke on that cassette still haunt me to this day. He sounded so convinced, so sincere in what he claimed to have seen. I try to convince myself that I'm simply overthinking it, that it was nothing more than the ramblings of a deeply disturbed patient. But is it really just that? Or is there something more to it?